Hello, this is Noah with Nomad Gaming, and thank you for joining us for another video about the Marvel Champions LCG. Marvel Champions is a living card game produced and distributed by Fantasy Flight Games, and if you are looking for a place to stay up to date with content, strategy, deck building, and of course gameplay, hit that subscribe button so that you can stay tuned for our future videos, and check out our library of past videos so that you can stay up to date on what is happening in your favorite Marvel card game. Today we are bringing you an exciting hero review from our latest campaign expansion, The Rise of Red Skull. There are two heroes in this expansion, and today we are focusing on Hawkeye, and we will jump into that by taking a look at our signature hero and finding out what is in store for those who play him. On our identity card, we see our alter ego is Clint Barton. He has 3 Recover, the Shield keyword, and the Weapon of Choice action, which says spend 1 resource of any type, search your deck and discard pile for Hawkeye's bow, and add it to your hand. Shuffle your deck, limit once per phase. This is, I guess, a fixed or changed version of the mechanic that Thor and Captain America have iterated before. I mean, it's cool. It gets you your key upgrade early, allows you not to have to worry about RNG keeping you out of the game. And since the bow is pretty much essential to Hawkeye's strategy, this is an important thing to have. It does cost you a resource, which means that you may not be choosing to discard the bow out of your open hand or opening hand unless you really just want to take a look at an extra card and are willing to sacrifice the cost to be able to get this. But if you don't draw it in your opening hand, you can definitely search your deck for it. The discard pile, I really think it's there in case you have to discard it and you need to flip over and get it back. So probably going to keep Hawkeye's bow in your opener and then search for it if you have to. But great ability, very useful to get things rolling. Let's flip over and take a look at Hawkeye. He's our hero. He's got 1 thwart, 2 attack, and 1 defense. He is an Avenger with the quick draw action that says exhaust Hawkeye, ready Hawkeye's bow. As we jump into it, you'll see that the bow is essential to the Hawkeye strategy, or at least to the signature strategy with Hawkeye. So we'll see how that works in just a moment. Before we do that, though, let's compare our statistics to the other heroes in the game. Updated averages here all the way through the current release of Hawkeye and Spider-Woman. So we have hit points of 9, a little bit low, hand size and alter ego of 6 is right on. And then you're going to find the rest of the stats are pretty much right on, maybe a tad bit low or high based on the decimal places, but there aren't tenths of a hit point or tenths of a card. So it looks like we're probably right on with average, although he feels small when you play him, honestly. The hit points of 9 feels very, very squishy, but that's because it is significantly less than the average. But he's got 3 recover, he's got 1 thwart, 2 attack, 1 defense, 6'5" hand size. Everything here is pretty normal for him, but that hit points, it is low, and it's noticeable when you play him. So let's take a look at his signature pool and find out what we're going to do to deal with that hit points and our strategy in beating the villain. As you can see here, one of the things that I find interesting is that our signature ally slotted in at the number 3 slot. Not at the number 1 slot, which had been customary before that, but pretty cool. We've got Hawkeye's bow in his quiver, we've got Mockingbird, and then we've got a slew of arrows, and then 2 upgrades that are skills that help us pay for the arrows. So cool mechanics. Let's go through them in more detail here, starting with our signature ally, Mockingbird, Bobby Morse. She is a 3-cost ally with 2 thwart, 1 consequential damage, and 2 attack with 1 consequential damage. She's an Avenger shield with 3 health. And she has an interrupt. When the villain initiates an attack against you, spend 1 resource of any type and return Mockingbird to your hand. Prevent all damage from this attack. I'm in love with this mechanic. It's like an ultra stun. It's better than a stun in a lot of ways because all of the effects that can trigger off of being attacked happen. You do have to be attacked. You can't throw her in front of somebody else. I guess you could technically get her in front of somebody else with a make the call, and then have them put her, they could make the call to put her in play for them, and then they could use her, and then she would go back to your hand, which is an interesting mechanic. A lot of fun there. But the preventing all damage means that you trigger everything that triggers off of not taking damage. You've triggered everything that triggers off of being attacked, but you don't take any damage, which is important because Hawkeye has no health, as we've already discussed. Let's take a look here at his bow and quiver. These are the 2 pivotal elements of the Hawkeye strategy. Most importantly, the bow. It's a 0-cost upgrade. It is a weapon restricted, and it gives +1 attack, and our arrow attacks gain range, which means they ignore retaliate, which again is a great synergy with the fact that we have no health. So we can avoid those retaliate triggers. This means that villains like MODOK and some of the others with really nasty retaliates aren't going to affect us, and that means that we could get in a lot of useful attacks with our bow and our highly powerful arrows. Let's take a look at the quiver, which is a 1-cost upgrade. It is an item. You can play arrow events attached to this card as if they were in your hand, and then this is a hero action. Exhaust Hawkeye's quiver. Search the top 5 cards of your deck for an arrow event and attach it face up to this card. So you can kind of stock up your quiver by looking through the top 5 cards of your deck. I believe those cards get put back in the order that they were. Haven't looked deeply into the rule yet, but that's how I've been playing it. But you get to look at the top 5, you get to take an arrow card, and then you get to put it attached to Hawkeye's quiver. Interesting here, you get to know what's coming out of your deck, so it can help you plan your turn. You can not have to have the risk of kind of blindly drawing your next hand. Really cool and interesting mechanic, but the quiver is useful. You can play a couple of different strategies with Hawkeye where you're playing all the arrows as they come into your hand, or you can try to set up maybe a board presence of some kind depending on your aspect strategy, and then use the quiver to queue up arrows for future turns and have a lot of options available as you proceed through the mid to late game. But these two are pivotal to the strategy. Let's take a look at what we're going to do with the arrows, or what's in the quiver. There are 5 arrows in our signature pool. We've got an explosive arrow, which is a 1-cost arrow. It exhausts all of the arrows are going to exhaust Hawkeye's bow, and then they have an effect. So explosive arrow is deal 3 damage to the villain and each minion engaged with that player. So you're going to choose a player, and then you're going to wipe their board, hopefully, or at least deal a ton of damage. Electric arrow is a 2-cost arrow event, and it is going to stun an enemy and deal 3 damage to it. But if the enemy was already stunned, you deal 5 damage. We've got the cable arrow. This one is super useful. One of the best thwart cards that we've seen in the sets, or in the game as a whole. It is allowing you to remove 3 threat, but you get to ignore the crisis icon, which is more relevant in some scenarios than others. But you can dig in behind the crisis icon and get all 3 threat off of the main scheme. This does not remove a total of 3 threat from any scheme. That's a card from the Spider-Woman set. We'll talk about that in her hero review, but this is 3 threat from a scheme. So you've got to hit the same scheme with this. But that's useful because if there's only 1 threat left on like your crisis icon side scheme and you want to really get the full value of this, you can dig in behind that, pull the 3 total threat off of the main scheme, and really get the value here for 1 cost. One of the things to note with the 1-cost arrows, cable arrow and explosive arrow, is that this is 1 activation of expert marksman, which means that you don't have to discard a card from hand to pay one of these if you've got expert marksman on the table. If you have both expert marksman on the table, you don't have to exhaust or discard any cards to pay for your first arrow on any given turn. So that is super useful. Sonic arrow there on the bottom is a 2-cost event. This is the same thing as electric arrow, but is for confuse. So you confuse and deal 3 damage. You deal 5 damage instead if you are already confused. And then finally, vibranium arrow is our big power punch. It's 6 damage to an enemy, and it has piercing. So you discard a tough status card before dealing the damage, and you peel off and you deal the 6 damage. So this eats up tough and deals a huge amount of damage. As you can see, there's potential here to deal a lot of damage with the arrows, and there's a lot of utility here: stunning, confusing, broad AoE attack, and then also threat reduction. This is very good. I like this package. There's 2 of each of these arrows in the deck, which means that maybe 1 in 4 cards in your deck should be one of these arrows, although I find that I am having an unusually high number of whiffs on Hawkeye's quiver, and I'm drawing an unreasonable amount of these cards in my opening hand. So I don't know how that's working out. I mean, I think it's just RNG, but it should over time average out that you should see about 1 in 4 with one of these, and you should see maybe 1 in your opening hand, and every time you flip Hawkeye or activate Hawkeye's quiver, you really should be able to find one of these and attach it. So interesting, fun mechanic, really pivotal to the play of Hawkeye, and allows you a couple of different strategies when paired with aspects that we'll talk about in just a few minutes. Let's look finally We've already mentioned it a couple of times, but we do have a resource upgrade. That's a one cost, it's a skill, and it allows you to do a wild resource for an arrow event. I think, I mean, obviously it's a wild resource because there's no resource matching right now. If we do get arrow events later that allow for resource matching, this is even more interesting. But like I said, you get 2 of these on the table, you don't have to pay for your first arrow on any given turn. So this is good. In your opening hand, I think you're really looking to have a bow. Well, really, you want your quiver and expert marksman. You can find the bow. So don't get over aggressive looking for your bow. Let's talk about some strategy. You really have 2 choices here. You can either try to support and manufacture a deck that is going to embrace the bow strategy, trying to get your arrows into your hand and trying to deal all the damage that you can. Don't forget about this 9 hit points. I played a couple of games where I just spaced on me what my health was and what my excuse me, what my status was as a hero at the time, and I ended up getting wrecked with the 9 hit points, especially with some of the new scenarios. There's a lot of surprise ways to take damage, and you can go from 3 or 4 damage to 9 damage really, really quickly. So you really want to make sure that you are staying away from damage. Don't end up taking undefended attacks if possible. Keep Hawkeye safe and protected. Figure out how you're going to do that, and that needs to be a key and part of your deck building. We've also got the need to play to our strengths. Don't be shy about the fact that these arrows and this bow are really, really powerful. I mean, you've got ranged and the potential for piercing. You can do stun and confuse. You've got extra attack based on the bow if you've got it attached. So a lot of value here, and you just want to really try to come up with ways that each aspect can embrace what Hawkeye wants to do, which is essentially, stand off to the side, pick your target, fire, and hit your target. So let's take a look at aspects, though, and talk about some of the brainstormed ideas that I have for how to make the aspects better. Of course, there are 4 aspects. We've got aggression, justice, protection, and leadership. Let's get kicked off with leadership, since that's what he comes paired with out of the box. And talk about some of the strategies that could be employed to make leadership high quality with him. Out of the box, he comes with some interesting stuff. He comes with an event that allows you to add tough. He comes with some cool new allies like Hawkeye, Kate Bishop, who you can see on the screen right now. What I've highlighted here is really the idea that you don't want to take damage, and so leadership gives you a lot of options to support the idea of focusing on your quiver and arrows and having other people, other cards take on the defensive responsibility for you. And so you could really dig in deep now with the make the call strategy. There are 4 2-cost allies here, all with huge value. Maria Hill's going to draw you a card. Squirrel Girl's going to deal a broad amount of damage. Wonder Man has a strong attack ability if you want to discard cards from your hand. Otherwise, he just serves as a great shield. And then Hawkeye, Kate Bishop, I talked about her in our spoiler video, but this card has a lot of utility, particularly in a deck where you're trying to cycle through cards to find arrows and to really have specific combinations of cards in your hand. The ability to just exhaust her and discard a card and throw out some extra damage is a big deal. But for 2 costs, she can be played again and again and again, really taking advantage of the ability to use these characters to protect your hero. So that would be one of the leadership strategies you can embrace. If you do that, you want to then focus on the signature side of trying to set up your arrow events. You can play your arrow events if you need to early in the game, but you really want to focus your resources on setting up this board presence, setting up some of the supports that are going to make this happen, and then maybe play things like strength and numbers to get some card draw off of these guys during your turn. Don't activate them a lot, so you're not going to use their last health point to get rid of them. And then having them support you to stay in hero form as long as possible, so that late in the game you're able to trigger off several arrows in a turn, take full advantage of that big damage that you can produce, and win the game that way. Let's jump over and take a look at aggression. Aggression has a similar kind of take on it, but it's a different strategy. And that is, aggression has a lot of low-cost cards. There are, here you can see there are 4 zero-cost events that are really powerful in aggression. You've got 3 hit point or 3 attack when you have your bow equipped as Hawkeye, and you could play Skilled Strike to go up to 5 attack for free. Get Over Here deals damage. We don't have a way to get the aerial trait, so we're not really probably pulling minions to us, but we do have the ability to deal damage for free with Get Over Here. Mean Swing, we've got a weapon upgrade that we're going to have attached to our hero, and so if we don't have an arrow to play, we can exhaust our weapon upgrade and play this for free to get +3 attack on our basic attack, which would put us up to 6 attack. If we've played Skilled Strike, we could be at 8 attack. Those are Hulk-like stats. This is a big, this is a really cool strategy. If you don't have an arrow to play and you've got these in your hand, you can really take advantage of Clint's strength and get in there and crush something with a big swing, maybe even 2 swings if you have a way to ready. And then, of course, chase them down. If you've got, we've got the ability to take out multiple minions in a turn. And if we defeat an enemy, we can remove 2 threat from a scheme for free with Chase Them Down. So really, the idea here would be that you use these free low-cost events so that you can focus spending your other resources on your arrow strategy and on developing your board with some supports that make that arrow strategy even better, Helicarrier, Quinn Carrier, things like that. We also have, in aggression, there's another really good weapon attachment, Yarnbjorn, that we could put on as our second weapon attachment. It would give us the ability to exhaust for Mean Swing. If we wanted to use our bow for an arrow attachment, that would be the downside of Mean Swing. You can't exhaust the bow twice unless you've exhausted Hawkeye to ready, and you can't do that if you're going to be attacking with him. So it's a complicated interplay, but there's an idea here that I think really plays out strong, and Yarnbjorn can be a part of that. A lot of the events and stuff that we're going to be playing have the strength resource. The signature pool has, I think, 2 strength resources and 4 wild resources, so we can use those to trigger off Yarnbjorn, which would give us that extra damage. And we could really focus, instead of focusing on the arrows, we could focus on using our basic attack as effectively as possible. And then I just have a penchant for Hall of Heroes. It's a fun card. When you defeat minions, you get to put counters here, and then you get to draw cards. And if you get this stacked up and you have to flip down because your health is so low that you get to heal, then you can just draw a ton of cards here. And then when you flip back over into hero form, you've got theoretically a ton of cards, which include arrows and resources. And you can just go to town as Hawkeye, just firing off arrow after arrow after arrow and really clean up the board. So I think aggression's got a really cool cohesive strategy that I'm excited to work on some more, flesh it out and build and get some gameplay out there for you guys. But let's go ahead and jump over and take a look at what I think is one of the most interesting elements or ideas that I've come up with, which is the Great Responsibility Justice deck. I know a lot of people aren't going to think about Great Responsibility when it comes to Hawkeye because of the 9 health. And quite honestly, I think that those people are right. I'm just kidding. This is just a terrible idea. In Justice, though, we do have a couple of really good cards that I think pair well with the ideas that are included in the signature pool. With Justice, I think it takes much more of a second seat to the signature pool, but with cards like Concussive Blow, you can go ahead and lay out a Confuse. You can get some incidental damage off of that and then set up later a Sonic Arrow that will deal a bunch of damage, because if you're already confused, you can get 2 costs for 5 damage there. We've also got Stealth Strike, which is just a powerful card. All in general, you get to deal 4 damage, and if the enemy is defeated, you remove 2 threat from a scheme. Being able to do both in any given turn is a great power, and focusing on your signature strategy means that you don't have to use and rely on Stealth Strike as one of your main damage ideas. You can use this card as a resource early in the game and then set up opportunities later in the game where you can deal your 4 damage to kill an enemy and take off the 2 threats, so you're getting maximum value out of this. And then, of course, we all know Beat Cop. Beat Cop is one of the newer cards that's been released, came with us in the Hulk pack. For 3 cost, you get to remove a threat per turn from the scheme, basically by exhausting Beat Cop. And then if you wanted to, although you don't very often, you could discard Beat Cop, exhaust and discard Beat Cop late in the game, and then deal 1 damage to a minion for each threat that you've taken onto the Beat Cop. So the theme there, solve a bunch of small crimes, have a big impact down the line. But you can nuke, set up an opportunity to nuke a couple of the big minions that could come out. A lot of different ways to play with this, but again, with Justice being the idea that it's taking like the second seat to the signature pool, these cards really do have some interesting implication for incidental play, and things like Beat Cop get out on the table early and just build value over the game while then you're trying to work on your signature pool strategy. So I like that. I work with this some too. Not as exciting to me as the aggression idea, but let's take a quick peek at protection, which is sort of like a hybrid of a couple of the ideas that we've talked about in my mind on how to play this with Hawkeye, Clint Barton. We do have, again, a 3-cost event that does a status effect and deals incidental damage, so tackle is useful in the context of setting up later turns with powerful arrow effects. If you've got, the way that these 3-cost events work is if you've got expert marksman or 2 on the table and you've got a full quiver, you can throw out a tackle event from your hand, paying most of your hand for it, and then you can then use expert marksman to pay for your arrow to get 5 damage instead of 3 plus a condition attachment. So maximizing your damage there, and if you've been able to pay with the strength resource, you'll be able to have dealt 8 damage and stunned for 5 cost, which isn't a bad return and could really swing the game late on. I'm highlighting here, there are 4 key cards I think that are going to help with protection. Protection has the ability to keep us in our Hawkeye form for as long as possible. Cards like Defensive Stance and Energy Barrier are going to allow us to keep damage off of Clint and help us to be well, so that we can use our signature cards as often as possible. Momentum Shift is a 2-cost event that's going to let us heal 2 damage but transfer that to an enemy, so this is big value. Both Momentum Shift also matches the the resource requirement for tackle, which is extra useful if you don't have any damage to heal. You can maybe get that bonus value off of that resource match. And then an ally like Clea is going to shuffle back into our deck every time she's defeated, but that means that we get to repeatedly use her before we reshuffle, and so that's going to help us stay alive longer as our hero, which is super value. I'm pretty excited for all of these cards to be paired with our Hawkeye, Clint Barton. A couple of cards that aren't featured on the screen here. Indomitable lets you draw cards if you don't take any damage during an attack, and like we talked about before, Mockingbird's going to allow the attack to happen but then prevent all the damage, so you could use that to trigger and draw cards. But honestly, I'm probably not going to put Indomitable in a deck with Hawkeye. I'm never going to defend with him if I can help it. So yeah, don't defend with Hawkeye if you can help it, and don't put cards in your deck that make you defend with Hawkeye. You want Hawkeye to be available on your turn anyway, so that he can ready your bow and you can pop off a couple of arrows to make things happen. But protection looks like a fun build too. It's got the core ability to keep you alive. You can also med team and night nurse and stuff like that to stay healed up. But it's good. I like it, and I'm interested to hear what you guys are doing in terms of playing protection here. But that's going to wrap it up for today's hero review. Appreciate you joining us on the channel today. Of course, if you've made it this far, do us this huge favor of hitting the like button, subscribe, share, turn on your notifications, and until next time, folks, let's go game.